So let me just first say, the reason I haven't made an entry in a while is basically because in the UK we have, I don't know if it's observed in other nations, but in the UK we have a period of remembrance to show respect for those who have died and fought in wars around the world. And I didn't think it was proper or dignified to post during that time, so I didn't. In any case, let's talk about what we're talking about today. I was talking to a friend of mine today, or not today, the other day. He asked me why defence firms would choose to go public. Now, for those of you who don't know, going public is where a firm chooses to IPO. And after this, it will be listed on the stock exchange. So if you're in the UK, as I am, that's the LSE, the London Stock Exchange. Anyway, he queried why defence firms choose to go public. And I gave him, the rote economics answers, the micro answers of why firms generally go public. And he actually made some really good counterpoints about why that's not okay for defence and about how firms are effectively, defence firms particularly, at the whim of the public if they choose to go public. And that may leave us in a more vulnerable position if a war arrives, and how certain nations' citizens, let's say, if they are on an opposing side in that war, they may invest, or they already may have invested, and effectively they will have control over national defence production, and that's a huge issue. It's foolish to deny that that wouldn't be a huge issue. So he made all sorts of really excellent points, but that was the core one. And it really did make me think, because I am obviously in favour of defence firms as something that synergises with national military organisations, as something which is hugely beneficial in its existence. So, nonetheless, even I have to admit, with the position I hold, that it does seem a bit hazardous to go public. And the answer is, frankly, yes. There are hazards to going public for a lot of firms. And the reason I say a lot of firms, not just defence, is that we have to apply this consistent principle and move beyond the visceral. So many people are afraid that defence firms may fail us in our greatest time of need. Now, this may be true, but I would argue that the same is true for what I have decided to dub hippopotamus firms. Now, why am I calling them hippopotamus firms? The hippopotamus is the most dangerous large animal, in Africa. Okay? They are generally unsuspecting, but nonetheless they are deadly. So, when one thinks of these sorts of industries, when one thinks of hippopotamus, they look good, they look unassuming, slow. They often operate below the surface of public view, or in the hippopotamus's case, the water, and without much consideration from anyone else. Hippopotamuses look cute. People don't pay too much attention to them. They don't see them in the same way that one sees a lion. Yet they are huge hulking beasts that have far more power, far more speed in operation and in physicality than people expect. Beyond the logic behind the hippopotamus and hippopotamus industries being public, which is also highly debated in the form of, let's say, nationalisation of energy firms, the former nationalisation of coal, steel, rail, even post, and these are the firms I would classify as hippopotamus industries. Defence certainly does conjure up a feeling that it's not similar to the rest. At the very least, going public should be treated with the same respect and knowledge of consequences as the hippopotamuses. Nonetheless, that doesn't solve our problem. If we're to say that we're applying a consistent standard across all hippopotamuses, then it's an issue for all of them. And so it's still an issue for defence firms. So I've had a think, and here's what I've come up with. In regard to why defence firms generally go public in the first place, it's actually more attractive to defence firms than a lot of other firms, and here's why. First off, we need to know why firms generally do go public, sort of more widely. And there's a plethora of reasons why defence firms do the same, but do bear in mind that, in effect, it's the same business practices. It's merely goods and services firms that are involved with a military product. The same rationale applies to them as every single other business, right? Firms often go public, first and foremost for capital. There's a huge financial benefit to raising capital through the sale of equity. For industries like defense, this financial boost is even more important because the industry is, at least for technology, production, and even services, so very R&D reliant, and it's reliant on a lot of processes that are really expensive. So if we look at R&D, which actually means that firms can develop procedural, administrative norms, and this applies to nearly all defense firms, regardless of status, really. They have high overhead, because in order to operate, they have to. Going public is a really good way to offset that, and perhaps pay off the debt they may have, or utilize money for growth. And growth generally comes from often more overhead. It's trade-off. Increasing overhead through spending on R&D makes a better product. It makes better machines to produce something of a higher quality, to buy higher quality resources, buy in bulk from suppliers, sell at a more competitive price. In the first instance, there is a huge financial benefit that can be produced for all these sorts of things, and it's particularly attractive to the defense sector because the capital it acquires gives it a big boost in the ability to produce and the ability to offset costs. Secondarily, and this is often overlooked and it's really applicable to defense firms, IPOs generally, in becoming public traded, and IPO is an initial public offering, for those of you who don't know. You start at a price and are listed on an exchange. It provides a huge boost in the short run for capital, fair enough. But what is far more consistent, what's more important in the long run, is that it can basically raise public profile. So if we look at BAE Systems is in the FTSE 100. That's really, really important. It has a certain status by being in there. Now, this may sound as if it's against the aims of a defense firm. These sort of firms are generally known to keep a low professional profile because people despise them. Not me, but other people. There is a huge benefit to them expanding their public profile in a professional manner because it expands their talent pool. And gives them more legitimacy. So through attraction of more skilled employees who wish to work at larger, more notable, more reputable firms, that basically increases technological capability because you get better engineers. You get people who run the business more efficiently. It basically streamlines everything you want to. So likely, from better attraction of superior staff, employees than competitors, they gain an advantage. And with the higher capital that's raised in this short-term equity sale, that means that there's better pay for those employees that do come on, which are attracted, and overall, better pay means a higher skill pool because more people are attracted. You can filter through more, you can pick better options. So better public profile, while defense firms like to keep it low-ish, they are still applicable because it's a huge boost for defense firms when they get better employees. Something that is often overlooked as well, which is perhaps more specific to defense firms, is minimalist transparency drawbacks. Now, what does this mean? Considering their apparent controversy, defense firms that is, they often benefit in this regard. Operations that are matters of national security, they're often shrouded in government secrecy, or at least confidentiality, by necessity. So if they're working on larger projects, for example, which firms that IPO are more likely to be doing, if we think of Babcock, Leonardo, BAE Systems, Raytheon, that sort of stuff, they are generally, these firms that work on larger projects, they have a certain mandate for secrecy. But beyond this, their financial, environmental, social transparency is excellent. They are in a position to put themselves beyond reproach, and they choose to do that. because they are so hated by a lot of people, they are really, really transparent. Their controversy means that controversy inspires transparency. That's a quote. In any case, the transparency that these firms has is excellent. They position themselves to be beyond reproach, and they often are, and this is generally a response to the opaque record keeping of the past. So, firms nowadays, their financials, environmental reports, social responsibility, it's all covered under the umbrella that product technology processes today. So, defense firms, where am I going with this? They don't have a lot to lose in regard to keeping financial, environmental, social records private. They already share a lot of that because it boosts their public profile, it gives them legitimacy, it makes them seem more responsible, less controversial. So there would be a lot of benefit for remaining private for a lot of other firms in keeping this information, which allows a business to function perhaps in a less transparent manner, which means it can function in a more free manner. For defense and security firms, this is often out of the equation. Information is already out there, meaning there is also less administrative burden for when this information is shared, because it's already being shared. There is a greater initial market understanding of these firms when they do IPO, making the price less volatile because the information is already out there, and there's less downside for the stakeholder in the information going public that firms must distribute by law. It's just generally a good thing. So in short, while it may seem insignificant, the idea that these firms already share information, it means that the sharing of this information that is required by law is far less of a barrier to overcome. Another thing, which is actually quite a big deal for defense firms, or isn't such a big deal for defense firms, I guess, but it's a larger deal for non-defense firms in going public, is the cost of regulatory compliance. So some regulations can be expensive to uphold. Being public is certainly more risk, I guess, more potential for upside, but it's also a lot more responsibility. Firms that go public have to have excellent financial reporting. They have audit fees. They need investor relations departments. They need oversight boards to ensure that everything is well accounted for, legal, and safe. And defense firms already have this because, again, they have to be beyond reproach. They often already have investor relations departments, large investor relations departments to keep them safe. They have a lot of legal and financial responsibility, I guess. And they have a lot of these costs that would normally be added costs in regulatory compliance that aren't added costs when they IPO because they are already in place. And this means that they're even more efficient when they do IPO, which gives them, again, even better reason to do so. Yet again, defense firms, given their processes, regulatory standards that they have to hold in dealing with defense departments like the MOD, they have to comply with higher standards anyway. So a lot of this actually comes from them being beyond reproach before they are publicly traded. All in all, financially, it makes sense for defense firms to go public, actually a lot more than other firms. This is from a financial perspective. This isn't what we're here to talk about. Let's look at really the important bit here, the key part, the bit that is constant. And that is this issue from a security perspective. Because even I, someone who ardently supports the defense firms that exist in their contribution to national security, I see a potential risk. So if we're to say that large ownership of, let's say, a hippopotamus industry, energy, nuclear, of Hinkley Point C by EDF, which is a nationalized French firm, could be dangerous, then could it not be just as dangerous for open equity acquisition within the system through the LSE in a public market? Does that sound concerning? Probably. Now here is where you expect me to sit here and say, this all sounds concerning, right? And then, like Arnold Schwarzenegger in Commando, I say, wrong. Or claim that the claim is fiction, like Mr. Fawkes might. Not Mr. Fawkes, Mr. Frakes. That's it. In any case, I'm not going to say that. It is still a concern, the fact that firms can acquire these shares, and actually Hinkley Point C has proven a lot of that. I'm very much still undecided on whether the issue poses a large potential risk. A lot of nations do recognise this risk and put regulations in place to prevent it. The only question is, does the mitigation of this risk of people of other nationalities, organised by governments in a malicious manner, in order to take control of national defence firms, does that put a dampener on the free market system that basically makes defence in the West so efficient? Does that mean bureaucracy will set in? Does the dynamic efficiency created by such public trading, does the accountability, the idea of subsidization, overfunding, which is a hugely lowered financial responsibility on the government, does that outweigh the fact that there is potential for this to go very, very wrong at a time when a nation might need it not to go wrong most? I don't know. But what I do know is that there are mitigation methods in place. And there's a few, but the main one is those which fall under the National Security Investment Act. Basically what this says, and it's updated a lot, it allows the government to scrutinise investments, acquisitions from both entities, businesses, and individual investors in industries that are applicable or that affect national security. After this is done, after they've scrutinised it, they can intervene in the process if they have concerns and prevent the occurrences we're talking about, where certain, foreign, non-friendly national entities own large portions of firms which are required for national security. So, here are the protected industries: advanced materials, advanced robotics, artificial intelligence, communications, computing hardware, critical government suppliers, cryptographic authentication, data infrastructure, quantum technologies, satellite and space technologies, suppliers to emergency services, synthetic biology, transport, and then defence and military and dual-purpose products and services. Hooray! We've solved the problem. Now you'll say after hearing that there's a neat conclusion and I'll sleep well tonight. But much like at the end of a horror film when they state that the horror film is based on a true story, I'm going to have to keep you up a little more tonight. There are a few industries that are protected by the same act. And what probably the keen-eyed will have noticed, as I brought it up earlier, or the keen-eared, is that two industries I haven't mentioned today that are protected are energy and civil nuclear. And what this means is that in talking about Hinkley Point C, the government has not intervened in EDF taking over a large portion, taking such a large share of Hinkley Point C, despite having a double mandate both in energy and civil nuclear engineering to do so. So the question is, would they intervene for their other double mandate, which is defence and dual-purpose products, and military and dual-purpose products and defence? I don't know. The likelihood of the government intervening isn't set, and that is the issue. We can't necessarily predict it. It's not such an effective indicator that the government will intervene as they perhaps should if such a situation arises. It isn't as cut and dry as one might think. But one could argue that the government would intervene, did something, or were something to pose a real threat to the aforementioned industries, and properly scrutinise and intervene. Nonetheless, I think it's a really important question, and I would really be interested to hear what other people had to say, because I'm a little bit stumped by this. There is certain regulation that the government has in place, but I don't know whether that regulation would cover it, or whether they would even act. So, I guess on that bombshell, I'll leave it there. Good to be back after a week or so.